leave that up to you.
Right, I'll do that. Well, that's 1 minute and 14 something seconds. Let's just start with the introduction. Our next speaker is Frank Mittelbach. He's of course the lead developer of the LaTeX 3 team, one of the authors of the LaTeX companion, and known for many other things. Well, he's right here on screen, but the presentation itself is recorded. So, Tom, you know what to do?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, I need to stop that. Up.
I think we can start. Is it okay with everyone?
Yes, go ahead.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to our living room and to my talk on taming the beast. This beast I'm talking about hides inside pdfTeX, and you normally don't see it. But when we made an attempt to produce tagged PDF with pdfTeX, it came out and raised its ugly head. To introduce it to you, we have to give it a little bait. And so I will show you 2 simple examples and then explain what we need to do in order to tame it. The first example here shows a simple document that consists of a few paragraphs generated with the cant command to save space, and 2 multicol environments to add a little bit of extra structure to the document. The page dimensions are obviously odd, but they have been chosen to fit the screen size for this talk. So if we process this document, then we get the following output, and there are no surprises here. If all we want to do is to print the document, then we are ready to go. But if we want to send it to a person who needs assistance with a screen reader, then this PDF is insufficient, simply because it doesn't contain any structural information. That means it contains no tags that guide the reading process, and it does not support navigation through the document, which is needed if you're unable to read it on paper or on screen. So what is needed to improve the situation? Well, for starters, we have to identify everything that is sort of extra and should be ignored by the screen readers and mark those things as artifacts. Here in this case, it would be the page numbers. Then we have to identify the start and end of each paragraph and add some appropriate structure tags. So we have to add something here. Using the code that Ulrike explained. We have to add it here, and then we have to add it in the multicols, and here in this paragraph, the final paragraph, and then around the 3 little paragraphs in the second multicol. Okay, is that enough? Well, unfortunately, the answer is no. What we also need to do is we have to add not only the structure tags, but according to the PDF specification, we need to add marked content tags, MC tags, around each and every text block. So if we do that to our source document and put the stuff in directly, then it becomes rather ugly and long. And clearly nobody would ever want to do this on a regular basis or even just for one document. So to make this kind of tagging a workable solution, this needs to happen automatically. And fortunately, we now have a robust solution for this. Earlier this year, we have rewritten the paragraph handling of LaTeX to include a number of hooks that can be manipulated by packages or by the user. In addition, we also added a few kernel hooks, which are for exclusive use in the LaTeX kernel. These will be used for tagging purposes to avoid any interference with the package codes. This code is, or at least should be, transparent to any package or to code added by the user. And so far we found only a single issue with a package, FancyPar, that needed a little bit of first aid. Had to add one line. The FancyPar package internally deconstructs a vertical list after it's being made by TUG, and it makes assumptions about how that would look like. And these assumptions were no longer correct, as the mechanism now adds an additional glue node at the beginning of each paragraph. The new implementation was distributed with the June release of LaTeX, so many of you are already using it, probably. And if you are interested in the technical details, the documentation is part of the distribution, and you can easily get to it using TechDoc. Now let's augment the original example using the new hooks. In the preamble, we load the color package and we define a counter so that we can number each and every paragraph. We then go and increment that counter at the beginning of each paragraph when we are already in horizontal mode, and we typeset it in a small font in red digits into the margin. And at the end of the paragraph, still in horizontal mode, we typeset it again, this time making it stick out to the right. We also add a label to one paragraph for testing references to paragraph numbers. And at the end, we add a paragraph that is interrupted by an equation in order to see that we are still recognizing the whole thing as a single paragraph. And finally, we add a sentence that references the label we introduced earlier. Okay, if we run this through LaTeX, we get this. You can now see the little red numbers at the start and end of each paragraph. In the first paragraph, it's complete, so we see both marks. And in the second paragraph, the paragraph is split across 2 pages, so we only see the start mark. On the second page, everything is correctly marked as well. If you remember, we put the label into Hallihallo, so this is inside paragraph number 5. And if we come to the third paragraph, you can see that the equation interrupts the paragraph, but the paragraph is correctly labeled completely as number 11. And you can also see that the label mechanism is working. We have a reference to paragraph 5 on page 2 at the bottom. If we think about it, then we can clearly see that this coding is not really complete. First of all, using a single global counter means that we cannot rely on it having the right value at the end of the paragraph, because you can have nested paragraphs and then at the end you get a different number. So to get this kind of thing right, we would need to implement a stack. Also, we use the ref step counter to be able to reference the paragraph number with labels, but this means that this code cannot be used in old documents, because then suddenly a label put into the middle of the text would refer to the paragraph number and no longer to the section or chapter. And a lot of people are using this kind of mechanism to get a page reference to a certain page, and also being able to know which chapter this belongs to. So this is not a problem as such, but it would mean that something like this couldn't be implemented without updating existing documents if we would do this. But the more important problem we have here, the way it is implemented, is that in many places TUG uses the paragraph mechanism when it doesn't really produce paragraphs. For example, a section is something you wouldn't think of its title being a paragraph in itself. However, for TUG, this is precisely what it is. And so the mechanism that I just shown on the previous slide would need to be further augmented to enable to suppress paragraph markings in certain regions like headings. That's clearly doable, but not what I've shown here. So returning back to our main example, are we done with tagging the document? If we can automatically add paragraph tagging instructions to all relevant paragraphs? Unfortunately, the answer is still no. The example contains a few paragraphs that break across pages, some that break across columns, and some break across both. Now, PDF is a page-oriented format, and according to its specification, all marked content blocks, those inner elements we added around each paragraph, need to be confined to a single page. So if the content is split across pages or columns, it needs to go into separate MC blocks, which are then all associated with the same parent structure inside the PDF. To take the last multicol paragraph, here we would need to add tag MC end followed by tag MC begin twice to split it into 3 separate MC blocks. And we would need to make sure that all these 3 blocks are linked to the same ptag structure element. The issue here is that we just don't know beforehand where tag will finally break the galley into columns and pages. As this pagination is an asynchronous operation, it is next to impossible to add these tags directly into the source, for example, between the words what and first, or in the middle of the hyphenated word natural. And as an additional complication, the text in our example is generated. So we would need to put extra stuff somewhere into the generated text by the cont4 command. And that is clearly something we can't do. Up to now, the advice for tagging documents when using pdfTeX was to manually identify the lines where the column and pages break, and then add a suitable instruction to your document source so that the page is broken by explicitly at this point and the necessary tagging information is entered. Obviously, that is a noticeable amount of work, and depending on your size of your document, a rather heavy thing. Also, you need to use different code in different places, because sometimes you need page break, sometimes you need column break. In other places you might need something else as well. If the break happens in the middle of generated text, then you may not be able to do the whole thing at all without rewriting your text. But these are minor issues really compared to the real one, which is you probably have to redo all this whenever you make the slightest change to your document. We all know that we delete a word and the paragraph becomes one line longer, etc., etc. So small changes can have a lot of ripple effects on the pagination. And in all likelihood, this means that you make mistakes or you forget to check and update after a change. In other words, it is not really a practical way to work, even though it was the best we could do in the past. So what should we do to tame that beast? Well, we can try a rain dance and just hope we never make mistakes and we do it like we did in the past. Or we could attempt to use XeTeX extended mark mechanism to communicate between source and page generation. For this, at the start of each paragraph, we add 2 such marks, and we do the same at the end of the paragraph. The marks differ only in a tiny part. One contains a minus sign in one place and the other contains a plus sign at this point. Why 2 marks? Because this allows us to distinguish the case that there is no mark at all, but TUG has helpfully added the bottom mark from the previous page into the first mark, and the case that we have a mark. If there's no mark, then the first mark would contain the plus. But if there's a real mark, we see the minus. So this way we are able to identify the 2 cases. In the output routine, the information in the first mark, together with some housekeeping stuff we keep around, allows us to determine if we have to restart the MC block and to which outer structure this MC block belongs. In the same way, we can use the bottom mark to figure out if we have to close a still ongoing MC block, which is then restarted on the next page. If we are not in the main galley, we have to do it slightly differently. We have to look inside the boxes, such as the box for footnotes. To get the mark out of those, we V-split the box to the largest size we have available, so that everything in the box is ending up in the split off part. And then we look at the split marks we get by this process. Okay, for sure, I'm doing a lot of hand waving here, and believe me, getting the logic right and all cases covered took us a considerable amount of time. But we are now fairly sure that we have a working system. And even if that needs a little further adjustments along the way, it is solving the problem. So let us turn to our final example, in which we use paragraphs as well as footnotes that split across columns and pages. Here's the source. Again, some unusual geometry, just pages with 12 lines. And since we want to show long footnotes that break across columns, we need to limit the amount of space footnotes are allowed to take up. Otherwise, the footnote would take up the whole page because we shortened it. So we make this 40% of the text height. Other than that, we have 3 paragraphs in the main galley, 2 containing footnotes, one long and one short. Again, we use cont to generate the example text, and the star form of that command just doesn't add a par at the end. So the cont2 and cont3 form a single paragraph with the footnote in the middle. So if we run this through LaTeX, we get this output. The main text consists of the 3 paragraphs, and the second paragraph spans 6 columns, as you see. The first paragraph contains this footnote, which is very long and splits across 4 columns. In the middle of the second paragraph, there is the other short footnote shown in green here. So this will look fine on the screen and it will print fine, but as before, this is not an accessible document. So if we run the accessibility checker in Acrobat, say, we get the following result. Acrobat reports 5 issues, but it really boils down to the fact that the document is not tagged at all. So the first one is the real one, the others are just artifacts of no tagging. So let's make this document accessible. The ideal solution would be that all we have to do is to add a little bit configuration to the preamble without touching the real document. And this is exactly what is going to happen. Even though at the moment it is a little bit clumsy because most code is still in trial packages while we are in the experimentation phase. So the PDF management test phase package is required at the very top because we need to get the declare metadata command, and this is not yet part of the LaTeX kernel, so we have to load this package first. And we have to do this before document class because it needs to act on what document class is doing. We then use this declare metadata to produce some extra information about the target PDF document that we want to make and state what kind of processing we want to have. The key test phase in this command is used to load extra code, which is only temporarily needed while we are still having this kind of code in trial packages. So we are loading tag PDF, we are loading p-tagging, and we load demo footnotes. Similar thing with the debug key. It is only there so that we can get some extra information during the processing. For example, the line para equals show adds red little numbers at the start and end of the paragraphs, like the way I shown it earlier. Certainly this is something you wouldn't do in normal documents. Compress just means that the PDF is not compressed. Uncompressed means that. So that we can easily look into what kind of structures are produced inside the PDF document. Something, again, you wouldn't want to do in a real production setting. The final line is the important one. If we do not activate the tagging, then nothing will happen. The document would come out exactly as before. Okay, if we run this through LaTeX, we get the same pagination as before, which is a good start, I would say. The only difference is we now see the paragraph IDs shown in red little numbers in the margins because we use this option par equals show. There's, however, another somewhat hidden difference. Our claim is that now this document is properly tagged and accessible. So let's have a look at the new PDF in Acrobat again. First, using the accessibility checker, and you can see it is still reporting 3 issues. 2 of them are warnings that Acrobat is just not able to do the checks automatically, and that therefore something like logical reading order or the color contrast needs verification by a human. Okay, so that's something which you cannot automatically check, or at least Acrobat can't. The title is indeed missing, and so this is an actual error in terms of being fully accessible, but this is simply because we haven't provided one at a later stage that will be done through declaration of such metadata in this preamble phase. However, everything else is check marked, so for our purpose we are good. Now let's look at the content structure, the way Acrobat sees it in the PDF. And as you can see, there are various containers that are marked as artifacts. These are the paragraph IDs that we added as red little numbers, and the page numbers that also were turned into artifact. You can also see some LBL tags which contain the footnote markers, and some P elements containing the paragraph text. So this is looking good too. And finally, we look at the tag structure view. In this view, we should see no artifacts, but only parts of the document that are essential for comprehension. This view also reassembles the material that got artificially split across different columns and pages. And it does. If you look at the footnote, for example, which is represented by the tag note, shows all 4 MC blocks, one after another, even though they are on different pages in the print view. What you can also see is that the first paragraph consists of 2 MC blocks with a note element separating them. This follows the current flow in the document, where the footnote is between the first and the second sentence. However, this should really be an author choice, and eventually it will be, how this is represented in the structural view of the PDF. Possible alternatives are you request that footnotes are always put at the end of the paragraph in the structure, or that footnotes are handled as endnotes with links, and there may be other possibilities that we are going to implement eventually. So this brings me to the end of my talk. I hope it was of some interest to you. You have seen the beastie thing and seen how we try to get around it. Clearly, most documents consist of more than just paragraphs and footnotes, so this is not the end of the story, but it is a major foundation for documents, and it was a major obstacle when we were using the still predominant tag engine, pdfTeX. In LuaTeX, the situation is slightly different because you can use attributes, and then in the page generation go over the whole content of the page, and based on the attribute information do the right kind of thing as far as tagging is concerned. So this makes it much easier to deal with this page-oriented behavior of pdfTeX. But anyway, for pdfTeX, this is, we think, an important step forward, and we are glad to be able to report good progress here. The next step in our multi-year journey is to provide automatic tagging for other document elements. I mean, I just demonstrated that it's fairly easy, and we did it for the example to do this for, say, footnotes, but the whole shebang needs to be done in the end. So stay tuned, and with that, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Frank. And as you may see, there are already questions, one by Boris in the chat.
Does the mark mechanism also solve the old problems of hyperlink split between pages? Yes, it is going to be, or it is.
Hello, Frank. I wonder what's the time frame for developing the package? Do you think that something is available for everybody as a standard feature of LaTeX?
Well, that is actually something that we that I talked about on the last conference. We clearly think that this is a very complicated problem, and we worked out a project plan which has about 6 phases, and our expectation is that this is a multi-year journey in which we have now reached phase 2, or working in phase 2. The whole plan there is on the LaTeX website as a feasibility study that we undertook to see if this project is actually doable. And so long-term finalized situation is probably taking us 4 years, 5 years. But the whole plan has been shaped in a way that we try to find the phases already providing benefits along the way. So the very first phase was to set the foundation. Part of that was, for example, the new hook mechanism, which is already taken up by a lot of package developers, but it was mainly there to help the project to do right kind of structuring, underlying structures in LaTeX. The second phase is one of the goals here is to solve the basic tagging functionality. So by the end of phase 2, we hope that non-too complex documents can be automatically tagged. That will be still by loading a separate package and at this stage, but as I shown in this rather simple example, all that was necessary for that example was to declare we want to have tagging, and we want to be able by the end of phase 2 to have that then available for the major elements of LaTeX, list structure, headings, footnotes, those kind of things. but excluding mathematics, complex tables, and some other stuff. So that's the current planning. Details, as I said, in the feasibility study and in the talk that I gave last year, which also I think is a TUG paper. Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Are there any more questions?
Yeah, there is one from Ross, I think, at least. Please clarify just how many marks are needed per paragraph, 2 or 4? 2 in the beginning and 2 in the end. As I said, I mean, the reason why there are two marks after each other is simply that you can then see if it is just taken over from a previous page and stuck into the top mark in the first mark, or whether it is a genuine mark on that page. Because in one case you get the second scene, the second mark seen as your first mark, and when it comes from the previous page, and if it is a real mark, you see the first of the two. And this is the reason why we have 2, and you need the same at the end.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought the 4 meant. Yes, so yeah. I don't know if that went through. Anyway.
What about speed of compilation for heavily tagged documents? Certainly the more processing you do, the longer everything takes. That's a fact of life. Nevertheless, I don't think this is actually going to be an extreme burden, because basically there is work to be done on a page-by-page level, and the rest is, I wouldn't say lightweight, but it is not as heavy as one would think. I just recently tried to debug a little thing in a document that I was working on, and I was amazed about how many thousand lines showed up because microtype was doing its magic in the background and doing stuff because there was a font change happening. And these days, there is so much going on inside LaTeX. I don't think we will see an extreme sort of slowdown because you turn on tagging. No. But in some sense, we will have to see. Maybe the future will prove me wrong. But as far as I would say, we can see now, this is not going to be an issue. Jonathan is asking a question: what can be done today to help better tools produce better output from documents we are now writing? That's a very broad question.
What I have in mind is for example, how can I put it? for example, a quality check. Are there things in this document that we don't think we're going to be able to handle in the future? That's one thing. And then the other thing is, suppose I do the document now, and in 5 years' time, it's ready to be processed with new tools, but I've lost the environment in which the document was created. So if we're waiting for the new tools, we really need to have a big strength of reproducible typesetting. Those are examples of what I have in mind: reproducible typesetting and lint or quality checking tools on the source. But I wondered what your comments and ambitions were.
Well, I think you hit a very important point here. I mean, LaTeX is trying, or has tried in the last 30 or maybe even more years, to blend between the pure structural description of content, where you just define your logical structure, and the actual need to tweak that, because automatic translation from structure to whatever output you desire is not ever 100% perfect, and as a result, quality of input sources and reusability of input sources kind of vary between how far you are on writing pure text, pure source, which is following very strict structural rules, and you do a lot in between, tweaking, and sometimes very messy tweaking, because you misuse things just to make things work in terms of visual output side, which then, if you want to do something else, like producing an accessible document, goes heavily wrong because you used something which is then interpreted as a certain structure, but it was never meant to be that structure. It was meant to be that output. Like people using \paragraph to get something bold, and knowing that there's no number in most document classes, therefore it doesn't matter that they misuse a heading. Those kind of things certainly will make translation to different outputs very complicated, and having and working on sort of lint type things where you can check your source for quality would be an important aspect. One point that we try to do is as I said, we try to have this whole journey being producing results in reasonable quick succession, and those results should be usable in the sense that, for example, if I said we are not doing mathematics or tables, it could still and will tag the overall formula as there's a formula, and so those kind of things would be already correctly tagged, only not to the detail where you want to have it. So we are not going to wait for 5 years or so to get the first applicability here. And out there in the field, there are a lot of people actually using tag PDF, even in a very manual way, which is on one hand very encouraging. On the other hand, obviously, something they need, and I hope they all understand that this is a moving target, the way we work on it. So we are getting away from this moving target to stuff that is going to be usable and long-standing. And so yes, that's my view here, that very soon we will be able to actually make use of those tools in a broader sense. And that will then be the time when we will try and work on doing bigger tests by using existing documents and see the quality level that we can reach already and where the problems are. And this is where it will become important to engage in various directions with various parts of the communities, as well as getting a bigger force of people helping to make this a success.
Thank you, Frank. There's just over 1 minute left, so we would have time.
Just looking if is there anything other in terms of questions that I missed?
So there was one question by Takuto, which seems to have been answered in the chat. But
yeah,
Takuto,
that's what I thought. Yeah.
I just allowed you to talk if you want, or you have 1 minute.
No, I'm fine. I think I said everything. I even did a rain dance. So. So if there are no other questions, then thank you for the interest, and we have a break, aren't we?
No, it's Jonathan, and then the break.
Oh, sorry, then it's the break. Yes. Okay, good. Then we stop, and yeah, it's about time anyway.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, Frank.
Yeah,
And
thanks, Frank. Thanks very much.